This weekend I watched the new live-action movie, or at least new to Netflix at the very least, Fullmetal Alchemist, The Revenge of Scar. And I saw a trailer that had me kind of excited to see it, so I'll be honest, I marked the calendar and I was waiting for August 20th and I was looking forward to my chance to finally get to see it, even talk to some of my friends about it. I know it's kind of dangerous having your anticipation a little too high, particularly for live-action anime adaptations, but what can I say, I really kind of was excited to see it. And I'll say that I haven't seen the 2017 live-action Fullmetal Alchemist, like the first movie in this series. And the reason is because I heard it wasn't really great, so I'm kind of jumping into the middle of the story. But since I'm familiar with the anime, I thought I'd be okay. And there are going to be spoilers in this video, spoilers for the live-action movie, the anime that corresponds to the story, and probably the manga. I haven't read the manga, but I imagine that's going to get spoiled as well. So I'm going to warn everybody right now about that, nice and ahead of time. Give you a chance to bail out on the video if you don't want any spoilers for Fullmetal Alchemist in any way. But as far as talking about the movie, reviewing it, I'm really going to spend a lot of time talking about the characters, kind of focusing on the casting and the performance, the wardrobe, the costumes, etc. But of course, I'm going to address the story, the plot, the storyline, the effects, all of that as well. And as I like to do, I'm going to emphasize the positives, but I will have a few negative criticisms that I have to throw in along the way, just to be fair, because there are a few things that didn't sit as well with me as others. And here comes the first major spoiler, and that is what part of the story this movie encompasses. And this movie begins with the introduction of Scar, and it takes us through until a trio of characters are consumed by gluttony. So if you're just curious which part of the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood story or Fullmetal Alchemist story is being told, that's it, from when Scar shows up to when gluttony sucks a few people on the inside. And honestly, I think that's a pretty good middle part of the story. I'm all for that. And like I said, I saw the trailer. The trailer got me excited. And the trailer really led me to believe that it was going to make it to Briggs in this movie. Like the trailer I saw had Olivier Armstrong in it. It had what looked like the wall at Briggs. But after having watched the movie, I think that would have just been too much to cover in 2 hours. So of course it doesn't make it there. And 2 hours is about the runtime of the film. I think you get 2 full hours of movie, about 5 minutes of credits for a solid 125 minutes total. But I thought it moved really quickly, didn't feel long or short. It felt about right for this story. But obviously, if they're going to squeeze it into 2 hours, that whole section that I told you about, they had to trim the story down a little bit. But honestly, there's enough side stories in the anime that I think they were able to trim it down pretty well. I don't think that they really lost the important plot points of the central tale that's going on in Fullmetal Alchemist. Of course, unfortunately, and this is one of my negative criticisms, I think the price they pay for moving at that brisk pace and getting us there in 2 hours, in my opinion at least, you may not agree, but I think that the viewer just might not form the strong emotional bonds with characters that I think has really made Fullmetal Alchemist such a beloved manga and anime. I think those emotional bonds are one of the best things Fullmetal Alchemist has going for it. And when you're rushing along a little bit, sometimes you know the reasons and the motivations, like they're all there on the screen, but you don't have enough time to think about it, to process it, to internalize it, to relate to the character that you're looking at. But it is difficult for me to comment on that definitively because I bring so much emotional attachment from the anime. I already have that emotional development. So I can't really gauge how somebody who's new to the story, how they're really going to feel about it. And I was also a little bit disappointed that a certain housewife wasn't passing by in the movie. So let's go ahead and talk about some characters and their portrayal in the film. And I'd like to start with Scar since his name is in the title and it's his appearance that's the motor that propels this story. And as far as the casting goes, and by that I guess I'm talking mostly about physical appearance, well, the movie Scar just didn't seem as imposing as I would have liked. He just didn't seem big and scary when he first stepped onto the screen. But fortunately, the story quickly showcases his abilities and it does let the viewer know what he's capable of and why he should be a concern. And the movie also explores Scar's history and his backstory, and it does so pretty completely, and it shows us what a tormented and tragic character, tragic figure that he really is. The movie also shows his ill-fated link to the Rock Bells, but we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to Winry. And I'd say Scar's costume, wardrobe, it's pretty much in tune with the anime, and to be honest, I think that holds true for pretty much everyone in this movie. The makeup for Scar works well for me. It's a fair bit different from the appearance of the Scar in the anime, but I think it's a pretty good translation into live action. Envy and Gluttony, a couple of the homunculi, well, they're a real test for the movie. Since they are homunculi and they're more fantastical creatures, well, they present kind of a particular challenge to bringing those characters to the big screen. I think both actors did a fine job, and I was on board with Envy from the get-go. I think like the gender ambiguity or the sort of fluid, non-binary kind of nature of Envy was captured really well by the performance and the costume, the wardrobe, the makeup, all that. Also, the most ambitious CGI in the movie is Envy's creature form, which we only get a glimpse of it at the final few frames of the movie, but I think it looked about like what you'd expect. And I will admit that I was a little disappointed with Gluttony at first. I felt like they didn't push the character's look far enough. Honestly, I felt like they just didn't have enough fun with Gluttony. But, my opinion changed a little bit. The more Gluttony was on screen, the more that character kind of grew on me. And they did get that creepy Ouroboros tattoo on his tongue displayed prominently in one part of the movie, and I always think that's kind of fun and gross at the same time. So now, I've got to take a few moments to talk about Alex Armstrong. They put some prosthetics on the actor's head, and they put them on his face, and they had this hairpiece that they gave him. It was just this crazy little tuft. I mean, I have to say, Armstrong looked ridiculous. But I loved it. I couldn't help it. I think Armstrong should look ridiculous. It was so fun to me to see this goofy guy up on screen. I loved it in a so bad it's awesome kind of way. Armstrong looked absolutely cartoonish, but it is an adaptation of a cartoon after all, right? And of course, he did take his shirt off in true Armstrong fashion, and the actor playing Armstrong, had plenty of muscles, but maybe not Armstrong muscles. And the guy looked so cartoonish anyway, I wouldn't have minded if they just put him in a rubber suit to make him look kind of like He-Man or something. I've seen those rubber suits like in a Saturday Night Live skit or something on that level. But Alex Armstrong is one of my favorite characters from the anime, mainly due to his ridiculous, over-the-top antics, so it tracks pretty well that I would like his ridiculous in this movie also. But I really do hope in the final entry in this live-action trilogy that they appropriate adequate time to his pose down with his first meeting with Stig Curtis. And then Ling and his ninja bodyguards, they probably had the closest appearance to the anime of any of the characters, and Fu and his granddaughter gave solid, competent performances. But of course, a bit more was required from the actor who portrayed Ling, and I feel like he delivered, but his real challenge is probably going to come in the next movie when there's a significant development for his character. When that occurs, I think it's really going to test the actor's performance ability, so I'm looking forward to that. One of the biggest negatives for me, from my experience watching this movie, has to be Mei. Because Mei just didn't work for me in the movie. When I watch the anime, I picture Mei as maybe a 10-year-old girl, maybe a little bit older, but she looks like a little girl. The person they cast for Mei in the movie, she might be 30. I mean, she's definitely not a child. I don't want to guess too much at her age, but she looks like a grown person. But she still kind of acts a little childlike, and it was just a little bit off-putting. So out of all the cast and all the characters and all the performances, the one that just didn't work for me was Mei. And I don't know why they didn't cast a younger person in that role, or maybe I'm misinterpreting the character from the anime. But to me, Mei, the live-action version, seems so much older and different than Mei from the anime. Definitely a lot taller, so that kind of just took me out whenever her parts of the story were going on. But on a more positive note, the tiny panda looked pretty good. I liked the panda. And the panda looked to me like it was a combination of puppet practical effects and CGI at some points, and I really liked it. And I was very concerned about Mustang and Hawkeye when they first appeared, because they didn't seem to pop off the screen with the charisma that I expected the characters to have. But I think both actors gave kind of a solid, understated performance. I wouldn't call it outstanding, but it served the story well enough that I stopped kind of mentally comparing them to their anime counterparts after about 20 minutes, and I think that in of itself is a pretty big victory. Also, since these are a couple of fan favorites, I'm curious to see what the Fullmetal Alchemist fan community's response is to these two, because I could see it not being great, even though I liked him well enough. The Fuhrer, King Bradley. That was a tough one for me because I had such a strong live-action version of him in my mind. I figure it's mainly because of his mustache, but I just can't help but think of maybe a 1995 Tom Selleck as Bradley. Of course that's not going to happen, but I just can't shake that dream casting out of my head. And I feel like I never got a good, consistent grasp of what the actor's trying to do with the role, and I don't think the live-action depiction did his abilities and threat level justice. But here's to hoping that they do a little bit better job with him in the next film. And I think Netflix said that the next film is going to hit September 24th, so in about a month from when I'm filming this. Now, I've kind of been putting it off because I've got a lot to say, but I guess it's time to talk about Winry. I feel like so many different discussion points about this movie all kind of intersect with Winry, so I'll put her discussion off just a little bit. First, I'll talk about casting and appearance. And Winry is such a fan favorite, and in particular a favorite waifu, that a lot of folks may have such unrealistic expectations that they'll be unhappy no matter what. And something that seems pretty trivial to me, but I do expect a lot of commentary on, is something as simple as hair color. Because in the film, Winry has dark hair. Of course, in the anime, she has light hair, light colored hair, blonde hair. It doesn't bother me. Like, I can handle a change in hair color, but I think some people tend to fixate on minor details like that because they have just this idealized image in their head. But rather than the hair color, what I kind of was a little bit more concerned about, or at least the question I wanted to ask myself, and I'll ask out loud so you could hear it, but how well is the character of Winry really developed before we actually need to care about her? Because she shows up, we get an explanation of who she is, what she does, but I feel like I don't really get to know her. But also, I already knew her from the anime, so I don't know if I'm just comparing too much to the anime, or if I were an outsider, would I feel like I don't understand why I should care about this person? I don't know. That's a question that's hard for me to answer. But the pistol scene with Scar, such an emotional scene from the anime. It came a little bit quickly in this movie. I'll say that it felt maybe even a little bit rushed. So I don't know how people feel about it if they didn't already know that scene was coming. For me, it reminded me of the same scene in the anime, so it did trigger some emotion. But what impact would it have on someone who hadn't seen the anime? Like I said before, I really don't know how to answer that question. And also, we have a scene in which Winry decides that she shares a philosophy of healing with her parents, and then she proceeds to forgive Scar and dress his wound. And again, that felt like kind of rushed. It felt like it was a significant change in her outlook just because I didn't feel like enough time was devoted to her introspection there. But it's a 2-hour movie. Like I said, that's the price you pay. By streamlining it, sometimes I think you can lose some of the excellent character development of side characters that Fullmetal Alchemist is so appreciated for being able to do. But having said all that, I do think Winry's actor does a great job in those scenes. I mean, she really does portray the emotion very well with her facial expressions and her actions. So I'm not blaming her for any lack of emotion that might be felt. But it's difficult for acting ability to overcome rushed character development. The live-action version of Winry's granny, Pinnacle, she looks fun and funny, and she tries to emulate the anime character, but that's tough to do because it's such a anime character, so small and old and funny and everything. And Van Hohenheim, he really has a very limited role in this installment, but he absolutely looks the part. I thought it was pretty good casting there. He served the purpose that needed to be served. I'm eager to see more of him in the next movie too. And then we also get a cool introduction to Father, kind of like being introduced to, I don't know, maybe the Emperor in his throne room in the Star Wars movies, or maybe like walking in on Darth Vader when he's either pulling his helmet off or putting it on in his weird little pods that he had. I just thought it was kind of a cool moment, the introduction to Father, that for me was a little reminiscent of the classic Star Wars trilogy. And then, I've got to talk about the Elric Brothers. I'm happy with them overall. I would say Edward's probably a little too tall. I think they could have easily found somebody a little bit shorter, or at least done a few tricks inside the camera to make him look shorter, a little forced perspective. I mean, Peter Jackson made 6 feet tall people look like hobbits. So, they could have done some things, but that's a real tiny nit to pick. It's like I'm fine with a change in hair color, but I'm not fine if he's too tall, just because it's so much a part of his character that he doesn't like being called a runt. He does get called a runt at one point, and he loses his marbles, and it's fun, and it's reminiscent of the anime, but you just can't duplicate that tonal shift of when he loses his marbles in the anime. And he does give us one classic anime pose straight out of it, so I had a lot of fun. I like the guy who's playing Edward. He looks great, just a little too tall. He can't help that. But in a very, very wise move, at least in my opinion, Al looks to be a practical costume. The best I could determine, it looks like Al is a person wearing that armor and performing, and it looks really good that way. I think if they'd gone for an all CGI, mostly CGI, or even like 25 to 30% CGI Al, I don't think it would have looked as well. So I really like their choice to go with a practical costume for Al. You do have a little, trade off with that because you can tell that the black parts are covered in cloth and not empty. But I really like that choice. I thought Al looked great. There's a couple times they do need to do CGI to make it look like hollow armor and stuff. And that comes across pretty well too. But I think that the depiction of Al is maybe my favorite in the whole thing. He does great here. But as a fan of the anime, I thought the movie was fun. I call it good, but not great. And it's a Japanese production with what I'm guessing is a predominantly Japanese cast. So a lot of the characters who were depicted as Central European in the anime and the manga, well, they're going to look a little bit different. But it's pretty easy for me to push beyond that. I think if you're familiar with the source material, but not too precious with it, you can have a lot of fun watching this movie. And I also think you'll be just fine jumping into it if you didn't bother with the 2017 film. What I'm much less certain of is how like a first-time watcher is going to feel about it. Somebody with no prior knowledge of the source material. So I'm going to ask if maybe any of you all could answer this. Like, did any of you all watching this video go in and watch this movie without being familiar with Fullmetal Alchemist? Or even if you were familiar with it, let me know. What did you think of Fullmetal Alchemist Revenge of Scar? Let me know down in the comments. And with that, I'm just going to say I'm proud of you for watching anime, and I'll talk to you again soon.
I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. It really means a lot to me. If you might be interested in Patreon perks like early access to videos, uncut reaction videos, ad-free videos, and the opportunity to vote on which anime will be covered in the future, then click on the link in the video description. Thank you.